Okay, I want to begin our discussion of the named reactions. As I outlined last time, all of them share in common the feature that the nucleophile during these reactions is an enolate. It could be an enolate of an ester, an amide, an aldehyde, or ketone. It is not the nucleophile that defines the reaction name or the mechanistic pathway. Instead, it is the electrophile. And the aldol is a reaction where the electrophile is an aldehyde or ketone. So I'm going to go through a series of these, first starting with an example of crossed aldol. So the crossed aldol involves two different aldehydes or two different ketones, or one aldehyde with one ketone. And in this case, generally you want to direct the aldol reaction, which means you want to make one compound into its enolate, 100%, and then you want to slowly add the electrophile to the solution.